Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your own family? Like no matter what you accomplished, what you built, who you became, you were still just the daughter they were embarrassed by. That's me. That's been me for as long as I can remember. My name is Simone. I'm 32 years old. I live in a two-bedroom apartment in East Vancouver with my 6-year-old daughter, Lily, and I work as a structural engineer for a mid-sized firm downtown. I wake up at 5:30 every morning, pack Lily's lunch before she's even awake, drop her at before-school care on my way to the SkyTrain, and spend 8 to 10 hours calculating load-bearing capacities for buildings that will still be standing long after everyone in this story is gone. Then I pick Lily up, make dinner, help with reading homework, do bath time, and stay up another hour reviewing project files before bed. I do this alone. I have done this alone since Lily was 14 months old when her father decided fatherhood wasn't something he'd budgeted time for. My family knows all of this. They've known it for years, and somehow it is never once translated into respect. My parents live in West Vancouver, the kind of neighborhood where the houses have names and the driveways are longer than most people's apartments. My father built a commercial real estate company from the ground up, which he's proud of in the specific way that men of his generation are proud of things. Quietly to strangers, loudly to their children. My mother volunteers on 3 charity boards and considers that a full-time occupation. My younger sister, Yvonne, is 28, works part-time at my father's company in a role that was created specifically for her and has spent the last year dating a man named, and I say this without any editorializing, Thaddeus Whitmore III. His grandfather founded one of the largest investment firms in the country. His father sits on the boards of 2 major Canadian banks. Thaddeus himself does something in private equity that requires him to fly to Toronto twice a month and talk about it constantly. I have met Thaddeus exactly twice. Both times he shook my hand like I was a contractor who'd shown up at the wrong entrance. My father turned 65 in October. My mother planned the party for 4 months. I know this because she mentioned it every time we spoke, which wasn't often, maybe once every 3 weeks. A phone call that usually lasted about 12 minutes and covered in order the weather, Lily's school, some observation about my sister's life, and then a polite but firm landing that signaled the conversation was over. I was never asked about work. I was never asked about how I was managing. I was asked about Lily because Lily is 6 and adorable and requires no complicated feelings. The invitation arrived by mail, actual mail on thick cardstock, the kind that costs real money to print. My parents had rented out a private venue in the British Properties, a restored heritage building perched up in the hills with a view of the whole city and the inlet beyond it. The event was formal. Cocktail hour at 6, dinner at 7:30, dancing after 9. At the bottom of the card, in smaller italics, it read, "Black tie required. We ask all guests to come dressed appropriately for the occasion." I thought nothing of it. I owned a formal dress. I'd worn it to a colleague's wedding 2 years ago and it still fit. I RSVP'd yes, arranged for Lily to spend the night at my friend Wendy's place and moved on. Then my mother called. It was a Tuesday evening. Lily was asleep. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and a set of blueprints I needed to review before morning. My phone lit up with Mom, and I answered it the way I always do, with a small, reflexive tightening in my chest that I've spent years pretending isn't there. "Simone," she said. Her voice had that particular quality it gets when she's about to say something she's rehearsed. Smooth, careful, like she's reading from a script she wrote earlier in the day. "I wanted to talk to you about the party." "Okay," I said. "Yvonne's going to be bringing Thaddeus. His family will be there, his parents and a few of their associates." "I figured," I said. "There's also going to be a very prominent guest, someone your father has been trying to build a relationship with for years in connection with a downtown development project." She paused. "I can't get into details, but this person is, well, they move in very particular circles, Simone, and the evening is going to be quite closely watched." I waited. "I just think," she continued, "that it might be better if you came to a separate dinner with us, before the holidays, just family, more casual. It would give you and your father real time together without all the," another pause, "without all the pressure of the evening." I set down my wine. You're uninviting me, I said, from Dad's birthday party. I'm not uninviting you, I'm suggesting. Mom. I kept my voice level. I've had a lot of practice keeping my voice level. You're asking me not to come. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. 4 seconds is a long time on the phone. You know how your father gets about appearances, she finally said. With the guests who are going to be there, Thaddeus's family and the others, we just want the evening to go smoothly. You'd be there alone and with everything going on in your life. Everything going on in my life, I repeated. I just mean, it's a complicated situation. Being a single mother at a formal event, not knowing anyone. I know you and Dad, I said. I know Yvonne, I know most of the extended family. Simone. And there it was, the particular weight she puts on my name when she wants me to stop arguing and accept the shape of things. I'm not trying to hurt you, I'm trying to protect the evening. This guest is very important to your father's business, and the Whitmore family has certain expectations, and I think it's cleaner. Cleaner? That's the word that stayed with me after I hung up. Not the disappointment, not the familiar sting of being the daughter who's quietly shuffled to the side. Just that word, cleaner. Like I was a complication to be managed. Like Lily and I were a loose thread that might unravel something if we showed up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call. Long enough that the wine got warm. Long enough that the blueprints stopped making sense, and I just stared at the lines without seeing them. And then something settled in me. Not anger exactly. Not the hot, reactive kind that makes you say things you regret. Something quieter. Something that felt a lot like decision. I was going. I want to be honest about why, because I've thought about this a lot since. It wasn't purely about proving something to my family. It was more that I was tired. Tired of making myself smaller to fit into the space they'd assigned me. Tired of accepting the version of myself that existed in their eyes as though it were the accurate one. My father was turning 65. He was my father. I had the right to be in that room, and no amount of rehearsed phone calls from my mother was going to change that. I also called my friend Wendy, who has known me since university and therefore does not soften things unnecessarily. Go, she said immediately. Obviously go, and wear something that makes them feel it. Wendy is 5'2" and has strong opinions about formal wear. I didn't have time to buy a new gown. What I did have, hanging in the back of my closet in a dry cleaning bag, was the tuxedo I'd worn to the engineering firm's gala 3 years ago. Black, tailored, with a white silk blouse underneath and wide-legged trousers that hit exactly right. I'd felt genuinely good in it. I'd gotten 3 compliments from senior partners and 1 from a project director who typically only noticed load calculations. I hadn't thought about it in the context of my family because it hadn't occurred to me that my clothing choices would ever require justification. But standing in front of the mirror the evening of the party, I thought, yes, this is right. Not as a statement, just as the truest version of how I wanted to walk into that room. I drove up into the British properties as the sun was setting, the city spreading out below in that particular way it does on October evenings, gold and gray and impossibly wide. The venue was a low, elegant building set back from the road behind iron fencing and old-growth firs. There were already cars in the lot, valets in dark coats, clusters of guests moving toward the entrance in floor-length gowns and dark suits. I sat in my car for approximately 90 seconds. I want to be honest about that too. Then I got out, handed my keys to the valet, and walked in. The room was beautiful. High ceilings, warm lighting, long tables set with white linen and low floral arrangements. The catering staff moved through the cocktail hour with quiet efficiency. A string quartet was playing something I recognized but couldn't name. It was the kind of room my parents had always aspired to and had finally, I suppose, achieved. My mother saw me first. She was standing near the entrance with my aunt and 2 women I didn't recognize, and when she turned and found me there, her expression did a very specific thing, a flicker of something controlled very quickly, sealed behind a smile that didn't reach the right places. She excused herself and came toward me. Simone, the name again, same weight. Hi, Mom, I said, you look beautiful. And she did. She'd worn deep burgundy, floor-length, understated jewelry. She looked like the evening she'd planned. I said it because it was true and because I meant it, even in the middle of everything else. She looked at my tuxedo and then looked away. I didn't think you were coming. I know, I said, but I wanted to see Dad on his birthday. She opened her mouth, then she closed it, then she said, with the careful neutrality of someone diffusing something, he's by the fireplace. I found my father surrounded by a cluster of his business associates, a glass of scotch in his hand, looking genuinely happy in the way that people do when a party is going exactly as they hoped. He was heavier than I remembered from the summer, and his hair had gone fully silver, and he laughed at something someone said before he looked up and saw me. He went still. Not in a bad way necessarily, in the way people go still when something arrives that they weren't prepared for. He looked at me the way he sometimes does, the way that makes me think, briefly, that there's more happening behind his eyes than he usually allows out. Then he said my name, and the cluster parted, and I hugged him and said happy birthday, and he hugged me back firmly, which is not something he does often enough. You came, he said quietly. Of course I came, I said. He didn't say anything else. I didn't need him to. I circulated through the room, said hello to cousins and extended family, accepted a glass of sparkling wine from a passing tray, found a spot near the windows where I could see the lights of West Vancouver shimmering across the water. I was doing fine. I was genuinely fine. And then Yvonne arrived with Thaddeus and his parents, and the room rearranged itself the way it always does when the people everyone has been waiting for walk through the door. Thaddeus's mother was the kind of woman who moves through spaces with the assumption that they were designed for her. She wore a champagne gown, diamonds at her throat, and had the particular posture of someone who was educated expensively and has never once doubted that it shows. She scanned the room the way you scan a menu at a restaurant you've already decided is beneath you, checking, cataloging, measuring. Her gaze landed on me. I watched her register the tuxedo. I watched something sharpen in her expression, not quite recognition, not quite dismissal. A calculation. Yvonne glided over and hugged me with the particular warmth she performs when there are people watching, the kind that has a specific pressure behind it that means, please don't complicate this. You look great, she said in a tone that meant, why are you here? Thanks, I said. You too. Thaddeus shook my hand, exactly as before. The dinner was lovely. 7 courses, local wines, toasts that went on slightly too long. My father told the story of starting his company in a rented office with second-hand furniture and 1 phone line, and people laughed in the right places, and my mother watched him with an expression that was the closest thing to pure love I've seen on her face in years. I held on to that. It mattered. About an hour into dinner, there was a stir near the entrance. I didn't pay much attention at first. Late arrivals weren't unusual, but then I noticed the quality of the stir. The way it moved through the room like a current. The way even Thaddeus's mother straightened. He came in quietly for a man whose arrival rearranged a room. He was in his late 50s, I thought, silver-haired, in a well-cut dark suit, and he had with him a woman I didn't immediately recognize, and a girl of about 7 in a navy dress who was holding her father's hand with both of hers. I knew him, not well and not in the way my family apparently knew of him, but I knew him. His name was Minister Calloway, Provincial Cabinet Minister, Infrastructure Portfolio. I had sat across a table from him 9 months earlier in a downtown boardroom when his department commissioned a structural review of a proposed civic building in the Falls Creek Development Zone. Our firm had done the assessment. I had presented the findings. He had asked 3 very good questions and then approved the project. I hadn't thought about that meeting since. It was work. It was the kind of meeting I have regularly and the kind of professional interaction that I store carefully and don't exaggerate the importance of, because in engineering, your credibility depends entirely on not overclaiming things. But here he was, crossing the room toward my father. They clearly had a relationship, some connection through the development project my mother had referenced, and then his gaze swept the room the way people do when they're orienting in a new space, and it landed on me. His face changed. Not dramatically, but it changed. He said something to the woman beside him, touched his daughter's shoulder, and then came across the room toward me with his hand already extended. Miss Bouchard, he said. I thought that was you. I shook his hand. Minister Calloway, good evening. I haven't stopped thinking about that False Creek review, he said, which is the kind of thing he said I'd come to understand when he actually means it. The seismic assessment you presented. We have since moved forward with the recommendations, and the structural team has been citing your firm's analysis in every subsequent briefing. I'm glad it's been useful, I said, and I meant that the way I always mean professional things, straightforwardly, without performance. He introduced me to his wife, who was warm and direct in the way of people who have no need to impress anyone. His daughter looked up at me with the frank curiosity of children at formal events who are bored and have decided an interesting adult is better than standing still. I asked her what she'd been doing that week. She told me she was building a birdhouse in after-school woodworking club and had strong opinions about dovetail joints versus butt joints. I told her I thought dovetail joints were objectively superior. She agreed solemnly. Her father laughed. This is exactly who she needs to know, he told his wife, and then he turned back to me and said something about a new infrastructure initiative his department was undertaking in the spring and whether our firm had capacity for consultation work. And I told him to have his office reach out and I'd be happy to discuss it. I was aware in a peripheral way of my family watching, not turned toward them, not playing to them, just aware, the way you're aware of temperature in a room. Later, I was told by my cousin, who has the particular gift of noticing everything and reporting it accurately, that my mother had gone visibly pale, that Thaddeus's mother had leaned over and asked Yvonne in a low voice who I was, that Yvonne had said, "That's my sister," and that Thaddeus's mother had said, "She knows Minister Calloway," with the specific inflection of someone recalibrating. That Thaddeus himself had washed the whole exchange with an expression my cousin described as like he'd read a document and found a footnote he'd missed the first time. My father found me near the end of the evening when the dancing had started and the noise level had risen enough that a conversation could be private. He stood beside me and looked at the room for a moment without speaking. "Your mother told me she called you," he said. "She did," I said. I didn't know she was going to do that. I looked at him. There's a version of this conversation where I would have pressed harder, asked why he hadn't simply put a stop to it, asked when he decided that managing impressions for business associates was more important than his daughter being present on his birthday. I've had that version of this conversation in my head many times. I know exactly how it goes. Instead, I said, "I know." Because the truth is, I've spent a long time being angry at my father for things I eventually realized were part of a longer, more complicated story than I had the full text of. He's not a villain. He's a man who was raised in a particular way, who built a particular life, and who has a very hard time holding space for things that don't fit the shape of that life. That's not nothing. But it's also not everything. "You did good work," he said, and I knew he wasn't talking about the party. The Calloway connection, that's going to matter. "I didn't come here to network," I said. "I came because it's your birthday." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said quietly, "I know." We stood there for a while, the two of us, watching the room. The lights were lower now, the dancing easy and unhurried, my aunt doing something joyful in the middle of the floor. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't an apology or a reset or any of the cinematic things we sometimes imagine will happen if we just show up. But it was honest, and after a lifetime of dancing around things, honest felt like enough. I drove home through the city in the dark, the bridges lit up over the water, Burrard Inlet, black and white on either side. I thought about calling Wendy, but it was almost midnight and she'd be up at 6 with her kids. I'd tell her on Sunday. I thought about Lily, asleep at Wendy's, small and warm under a stranger's duvet, dreaming whatever 6-year-olds dream. I thought about picking her up in the morning, the specific weight of her when she throws herself at me before she's fully awake, the way she smells like sleep, and the lavender shampoo we use. I thought about what the most liked comment on a video like this would say, something about how family should love you without conditions. And I thought about how that's true and also how it doesn't fully account for the fact that people are complicated and love is complicated and showing up. Anyway, in your best tuxedo, in the room you were asked to leave is its own kind of statement, even if nobody names it. I'm not healed from my family. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that one evening fixed everything, or that my mother called me the next morning to apologize, or that Thaddeus shook my hand differently the second time. None of that happened. What happened is that I went somewhere I was told not to go. I was exactly who I am, and the right people in the room knew exactly who that was. That's not a comeback, but it's mine. And when I picked up Lily the next morning and she wrapped her arms around my neck and asked if the party was fun, I told her it was okay, and she said, "Did you wear the fancy tuxedo?" And I said yes, and she said, "Good. You look like a superhero in it," and honestly, that was the only review I needed. I keep coming back to one moment from that evening. Not the look on my mother's face when she saw me walk in, not Thaddeus's wife recalibrating her opinion of me in real time, just Minister Calloway crossing a crowded room with his hand already extended saying my name like it was a simple and obvious thing, because to him, it was. That's what happens when you do the work honestly, for years, without an audience. You don't control when it surfaces or in front of whom. You just keep showing up, doing it right, and trusting that the record exists even when no one in your immediate life is reading it. I've thought about why my family handled things the way they did for so long, and I've stopped being angry about it in the way I used to be. Anger like that takes up space you need for other things. What I understand now is that they were operating from fear. Fear that I would be a liability, that I would disrupt something fragile, that my presence would cost them something they'd worked hard to build. And I get it, actually. I don't agree with it, but I understand the machinery of it. People protect what they've built. Sometimes they protect it at the expense of the people they're supposed to love, and that's a failure of character, but it's a recognizable one. What I refused to do, and what I think mattered most that night, was accept their fear as information about my own worth. That's the thing nobody tells you clearly enough when you're younger. Other people's limitations are not a verdict on you. My mother's phone call told me everything about her anxiety and almost nothing about me. The mistake would have been to treat it as evidence. I went anyway. I wore what I felt good in. I talked to the people I knew, did it professionally, represented myself accurately. And because I had spent years building something real, not a performance of competence, but actual competence, the kind that lives in project files and structural assessments and 3 very good questions answered correctly in a boardroom, the evening reflected that back. That's not luck. That's what integrity does over time. Not loudly, not on a schedule you get to choose, but consistently. The work you do when no one important is watching is exactly the work that matters when they finally are. Lily asked me once why I work so hard when it makes me tired. She was 5 at the time, eating cereal, completely unbothered by the weight of the question. I told her that I work hard because I want her to see what it looks like to build something you can stand behind. I want her to know in her bones that you don't have to shrink yourself to fit someone else's discomfort, that showing up fully, honestly, prepared, without apology is not arrogance. It's just what you owe yourself. She went back to her cereal, but I think she heard it. I didn't leave that party healed. I didn't leave with a fixed family or a solved relationship or any of the tidy resolutions we imagine will come if we just hold our ground long enough. I left with something smaller and more durable than that, the knowledge that I hadn't let anyone else write the story of who I was in that room. I'd walked in and written it myself. That's all any of us can do, really. Show up. Do the work. Know who you are when you cross the threshold. The rest tends to follow.